Few medieval weapons capture the imagination of historians and enthusiasts like the enigmatic Greek fire. This legendary Byzantine incendiary weapon has often been called the medieval flamethrower. Even today, despite tons of research and experiments, exactly how Greek fire worked is still a complete mystery. Based on what I've learned, I'm going to try and lay out everything we know about Greek fire. Whether you're an expert or a beginner, you'll walk away with a whole new perspective. In the 670s, the Umayyads launched an attack on the Byzantine Empire. They marched toward Constantinople, challenging Emperor Constantine. The emperor had some of his warships outfitted with a brand new kind of weapon. It used a nozzle and pump to project flames, burning everything in range and sticking to surfaces, even water. Despite these so-called fire ships, Constantine initially couldn't stop the Umayyads. They eventually even besieged Constantinople until the emperor finally decided to confront their fleet in a naval battle during the winter of 677 or 678. In a battle we know little about, the Byzantine ships used Greek fire to drive back the Umayyad fleet. Constantine then crushed the Umayyads in a land battle in Asia Minor, forcing them to abandon the siege of Constantinople and retreat. Incendiary weapons existed before Constantine VI, but this naval engagement was the first documented use of Greek fire. When we talk about Greek fire today, we usually mean that specific Byzantine ship weapon. However, medieval expert Kelly de Vries points out that in primary sources, Greek fire could refer to three different things: a flammable liquid shot from a siphon or fire syringe, liquid in small hand grenades, and a solid incendiary weapon. The solid weapon was mostly made of gunpowder and mainly used in Western Europe, but it didn't show up until the 14th century. It probably had nothing to do with the other two, but Western writers just tended to label all incendiary weapons ignis graecus, or Greek fire. Much of Greek fire's history is murky, especially its invention. Callinicus of Heliopolis, a Byzantine architect and chemist in the 7th century, likely built on earlier experiments and worked with other chemists in Constantinople. We still know so little about Greek fire for two main reasons. First, it was so terrifying that stories of its destructive power quickly became legend, overshadowing the actual technical details. Second, the Byzantine emperors declared the weapon a top state secret. Constantine VI, for example, warned his son Romanus II to keep the secret strictly for Christians living in the imperial city. Clearly, the Byzantines fiercely guarded the formula. Neither their enemies nor modern historians have been able to perfectly reproduce or reverse engineer the weapon, or succeed in finding the lost formula. In the 19th century, historians often thought Greek fire contained saltpeter to boost combustion, leading to theories of a liquid gunpowder. Decades later, in 1960, influential chemist and historian James R. Partington suggested in his book A History of Greek Fire and Gunpowder that it was a liquid gunpowder refined via distillation, resulting in a gasoline-like substance that worked essentially like a modern flamethrower. However, whether that technology was even possible back then is seriously debatable. It was likely some form of crude oil mixed with thickeners like resin. Modern experiments show that heating this mix to 60 degrees Celsius creates a sprayable fuel. It works, but we still can't confirm that this was the exact formula the Byzantines used. The search continues, though it's doubtful we'll ever find enough clues to perfectly recreate the Byzantine Greek fire formula. Greek fire wasn't just flammable liquid, it was a complete weapon system mounted on the Byzantine galleys, known as dromons. Descriptions mention a bronze siphon that sprayed the liquid, usually placed near the ship's prow. Above this siphon was a platform with wooden walls, allowing them to launch the prepared fire at enemies. The Viking traveler Ingvar supposedly encountered a ship with this device. The 11th century weapon of the Imbaris was described as blowing a blast of air into a burning furnace, producing a huge noise and sending a great deal of fire out of a brass tube. A ship hit by it reportedly burned instantly, turning completely into white ashes. Exactly how this apparatus functioned remains unclear. Scientists like John Haylock and Monson have proposed plausible reconstructions. Their model suggests the machine had a range of up to 15 meters, but it was extremely dangerous to use because the vessel heating the liquid could always explode. Primary sources indicate some ships were fitted with 2, 3, or even 4 of these complex machines. Operating them required multiple specialists, with each person only knowing one part of the weapon to prevent the whole secret from being leaked. We can be sure that this ship-mounted Greek fire was rarely used and mostly in naval combat. For example, in 727, Emperor Leo II used a fleet to suppress rebellious ships in the Cyclades, and in 941, the Byzantines set fire to another fleet. There are about a dozen other mentions of Greek fire being used in attacks across the Black Sea. Overall, however, mentions are rare. De Vries suggests this is because using an unstable flamethrower on a wooden ship was too risky, given that fire was already a major hazard at sea. Therefore, Greek fire was probably only used when the weather and current conditions were perfect. Historians John Pryor and Elizabeth Jeffreys also found evidence of Greek fire being used on land, though it was much less common. For instance, a treatise on siege warfare by the engineer Heron of Byzantium includes a sketch showing a soldier using a hand pump, the rear fire, to shoot Greek fire at walls to defend against siege towers. The second type of Greek fire, the grenades, faces similar difficulties regarding its ingredients. It was likely a mixture similar to the flamethrower fuel, but it was thrown by hand or launched by a catapult inside clay or glass containers. This weapon was mainly used by Muslim forces. Byzantine land armies also used these grenades by the mid-10th century, but they aren't as famous as the ship-mounted Greek fire, even though they were actually far more widespread. One source reported 20,000 copper grenades. In 1168, incendiary liquid was used to burn Cairo to prevent the Crusader king Amalric from capturing the city. The discovery of many Crusader shipwrecks in the Middle East and West Asia further illustrates how common this weapon was. By the 12th century, the term Greek fire meant something entirely new. The Frenchman Joinville provided a very clear account of this. In his chronicle of St. Louis' life, he described how Saracens used Greek fire against the Crusaders during the Sixth Crusade in 1250 as they tried to cross the Nile to attack Al-Mansura. Joinville wrote that the Saracens used catapults on the opposite bank to hurl Greek fire grenades across the river, setting fire to the workers' mobile shelters. The fireball that landed behind the river dam was as big as a large spear. It made a noise like thunder and looked like a dragon flying through the air, giving off such a bright light that the whole camp was illuminated. The day after that attack, the Crusaders abandoned their plan. So, why didn't Europeans adopt this technology? The best guess is that they simply didn't have access to the oil-based materials needed in Central Europe. While Greek fire was known about during the Crusades, it was hard to produce, let alone mass produce. As a result, incendiary weapons only became widespread in Central European armies after the invention of gunpowder. To sum up, we still know very little about Greek fire. Though it was more than just a grenade or a flamethrower, it was undoubtedly a terrifying and highly effective weapon. However, the Byzantines kept their military secrets so well that many details about its ingredients, use, and true origin remain a mystery today.